All right. Welcome back to Being the Best Version of Yourself podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Carey Heller. Today, we have an exciting show. We have Gabrielle here, and we're going to have a fun discussion. So, Gabrielle, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do?
Hi, Carey. It's really great to talk with you this afternoon. So my name is Gabrielle Czaja, and excuse me, I teach kids who feel like they're treading water at school and maybe feel a little isolated from their friends, how to feel calm and confident, how to quiet that mental chatter, how to manage the big emotions that always seem bigger than real life when they're growing up. And so if a kid can feel calm and confident, then they're just more happily and more easily able to function in the world. And one of the reasons I love working with kids is because I actually found my calling as a physical therapist and Alexander teacher when I was a teenager. Way back in the 70s, there was a big push for young girls to consider the professions. So for a career day writing assignment, my treasure hunting in the library, I think a library is a really magical place, led me to a book called So You Want to Be a Physical Therapist. And it was just amazing. I mean, there was something about the alchemy of scientific inquiry and problem solving, and then also helping people from each of their own individual lifestyles and values that I just found really compelling as a teenager. So fast forward, I became a physical therapist, and in my very first job, I hurt myself. And then I discovered the Alexander technique because even though I really did have access to excellent medical care, I still wasn't getting better. I was in pain every day. So when I discovered the Alexander technique and I started to have my first couple of lessons, I was just amazed from the very moment I felt simultaneously at ease and comfortable with myself, but also really strong and grounded and comfortable. It was this really interesting combination of power and also feeling calm at the same time. So I just decided right then and there to train to be a teacher. So what I'm doing now is I am helping kids and adults how to access their own body wisdom, to feel that calm and confidence so that whatever it is they want to do, they feel successful.
Well, that's neat. And it sounds like from you're describing that there's a big physical aspect to this, but not just mental.
Absolutely. You know, learning begins in utero. And we know this, but we don't know it. We tend to forget it, especially those of us that are in the health and educational professions. We learn to hear our mother's voice. We hear music. We actually maybe even learn how to manage stress in utero. Then we're born. And then all of a sudden, you know, life is just this very rich sensory motor feast. We crawl around, we put things in our mouth. And, you know, we sit and read, we run around the playground. And so we're constantly learning. I mean, from the moment we wake up until we fall asleep zonked, we are learning, and we're learning with our body. And then all of a sudden we go to school. And it starts a little bit in pre-K and then a little bit more in kindergarten and on up. And then all of a sudden we have recess and we have academics. So a false dichotomy gets set up. And we never stop learning with our body. So what I do is I help students bring those two things together, especially for the kids who are struggling in school, kids who easily feel overwhelmed. Those are the kids who can really benefit from figuring out how to be at home in their body and letting their body be an anchor so that they can quiet themselves, so that they can release physical tension. And then they can more easily concentrate.
Well, it definitely sounds really, really important. And does that look different for different people in terms of what that actually looks like physically?
You know, body shapes definitely have an impact on how we learn. For example, a lot of chairs in schools encourage this, right? And what happens when we're sitting like this, and if you wanted to try it now, you don't have to, you'll notice that it's hard to breathe. It's hard to be upright. And even sitting here, you can see how my body has changed in relationship to my computer and my keyboard. Likewise, if I'm really stiff and I'm trying to have really good posture and I'm tense and I'm anxious and I'm worried about how I'm going to do on my test, I'm also interfering with my breath. And all of this muscle tension is interfering with our ability to think and to think straight and to think clearly. So, it's really interesting because there's this ongoing conversation happening in our brain and our body all the time, whether we know it or not. Right? I mean, our brain is helping us stay upright. It's taking in the written word. It's taking in visual information, light, sound. And we want it to be all in the background because we don't want to get flooded and interfere with doing our work. That's true for all of us, for you, for me, for young people. But kids who are anxious, kids who are depressed, kids who have ADHD, it's really hard to manage what I call this neurophysiological noise. This conversation humming around that should be in the background is a little bit more front and center. So if kids are already feeling a little bit cognitively overwhelmed, then teaching them some very simple body-based skills of thinking more clearly can be really helpful for kids in these categories.
And is it easier for kids that are younger to learn this or older, or does age not matter that much?
We all can learn whether we're 2 or 92. But I think that the younger we teach kids how to keep from interfering with their natural poise, how do we keep kids from interfering with their ability as young sponges, right? I mean, we're just constantly soaking up information. So if we can learn how to stay calm and organized in our body from a really early age, then it's more easy to stay calm and organized as we get older. And I think especially it's relevant for teenagers. During adolescence, our ability to have self-awareness isn't quite all the way hooked up yet, right? They tend to be a little bit impulsive. There's not a lot of inhibitory action going on in the front of their minds. And so it's a really great time to teach self-awareness while that part of our brain is still developing.
Okay, well, yeah, that definitely makes sense that it's easier, in some ways as you're younger, but you can really do it at any point.
Yeah. And actually, I work with parents and teachers. I mean, my gosh, parents are stressed out these days. I mean, being a parent is a lot of work, especially for working parents. Being a teacher is also a really complicated, very demanding task. So even as adults, I mean, parents and teachers can learn how to learn with their bodies and really being able to take care of ourselves and take a moment for ourselves in the middle of an activity, I think is what's really lovely. I mean, exercise is important. Yoga is important. Meditation is a wonderful skill set and activity. But if we can kind of bring all these together and in the moment, that can be really helpful. One young person that I have worked with came to me actually for some hand-eye arm coordination issues. She had trouble handling a knife. This little girl was 11 and she had trouble opening doors. And the other interesting thing is she had the energy of like 4 puppies. I mean, she was really hyperactive, super smart, really curious, always asking questions. And what's interesting is the ability to be coordinated is also associated with hyperactivity. So in addition to helping her with some of her body coordination issues, I also taught her things based on the Alexander technique principles to how to stop in the moment. And if she started to want to interrupt or want to offer her opinion, which was important, it gave her a moment to settle into herself and then proceed.
And I'm thinking about this certainly for, let's say people, kids or adults with ADHD in terms of impulsivity, whether it's saying something or doing something. What I wonder though, with this approach, does the reason for the impulsivity make a difference? So for example, if someone has ADHD versus anxiety, and that's causing impulsivity, does that make a difference using Alexander technique and how you would approach sort of addressing it?
I don't think so. And I think I mean, any of us can learn at any time, right? And the principles are the same. What's really happening is there's something getting in the way, either with our feelings or in our thinking, that is not blinding us, but kind of creating noise. It's just creating this white noise. And so I think that any kids, regardless of what it is they're struggling with, whether it's emotional or more of the cognitive overwhelm, we can do the same thing. I mean, certainly a teacher wants to be aware of what's happening and what the specifics are, whether it's anxiety or ADHD. One of the things that I think is important, and it might be more important for kids that are anxious or depressed, is that feeling of safety, right? I mean, safety is absolutely necessary for learning. And there's safety as in my home is safe, my neighborhood is safe, my school is safe. But then there's also what I call neurological safety. And that's the stuff humming around in the background. And kids who feel anxious or depressed, they are not feeling safe in themselves. And so it's really essential to be aware that when you're working with kids who are anxious or depressed, that creating a sense of safety and a teacher being able to reach out to them in that way is really important. And when we're helping a child be in charge of their body, then they feel safe and they feel like they're more able to function out in the world.
Right. Well, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, certainly from like a biological standpoint, in general, this, safety, obviously there's different aspects as you described, but it's definitely, a very important thing.
Yeah.
And in terms of maybe thinking, people who may want to kind of take some of these things that we're talking about and even to start to apply some ideas related to them in their own life, with their kids at home. I mean, would starting with the seating position, would that be like a simple way to start with this? Or what do you think might be a good starting point aside from any sort of professional sort of assistance with this aspect of functioning?
So we have something in the Alexander Technique community. It's based on Alexander Technique principles. And I don't know if I've really explained what the Alexander Technique is. One simple definition is that it's a body-mind educational method that teaches us how to quieten the mental chatter, release physical tension, and then that helps support focus. But we have something called the Ready List. And what the Ready List does is it helps us in a moment engage ourselves in a really calm way. So do you want to try this?
Sure.
Okay. So can you be aware that your feet are on the floor?
Well, I guess I should put them on the floor first.
Yeah, there you go.
Okay, I have an ergonomic chair, so my feet are hanging at the moment. Let me. All right, now they're on the floor.
Ergonomic chairs are great. Now, as you put your feet on the floor, do you notice? Is there anything different about your support?
Yeah, well, I feel like now I feel it in my feet, so I feel in some ways more stable.
Exactly.
But I also feel a sort of like lighter in my back.
Yeah, I mean, if you're feeling lighter in the back and lighter stable, again, you're quieting some of that physical tension. Your brain is more online, and eventually you will feel calmer.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like I already feel calmer, actually.
That's great. That's great. So yes, the simple act of just putting your feet on the floor can really make a difference. And this is hard for some kids. Some kids have to learn how to do this. I mean, they're antsy. They want to run around and they want to move, and that's really normal. So how do we help them feel comfortable putting their feet on the floor is really important. So let's say we are about to take a test, or we're about to dive into reading a document on the computer. So we could just stop and look around your environment. Just see what's happening in your space, in your world. Don't be afraid to let your head and your eyes move. So we stop and we see, and then breathe. And sometimes when we just stop and remind ourselves to breathe, there is a little bit of a release of our breath. Now, still being aware of your feet on the floor, can you think about being soft and tall at the same time? So if we're soft, we're not we're not collapsed, and we can be tall, but we're not trying to have good posture, because that doesn't work.
It seems like an intermediary kind of I don't know if phase is the right word, but this idea of not sort of super stiff, but not sort of hunched over either.
Exactly. Exactly. I like to say upright and not tense, and then relaxed, but not collapsed. So
Yeah,
we
that actually
can,
feels like a very comfortable position.
great. So we can just stop at any time of the day. And we have to do this over and over. We can stop and see and breathe and think soft and tall.
Not I appreciate you sharing this, everyone. I think this is definitely something that I think a lot of people can certainly try. I certainly will definitely continue to try this on my own too, because I can feel how much. I don't know if any of you at home trying this out, but certainly I feel far more relaxed just as we're doing this during this conversation.
Great. Great. And again, the more we practice it, then the more our brain and our body learn how to be here on our own. So there's both a long-term learning that happens, and then there's just the short term in the moment. So we're really getting a double benefit of a short-term strategy and then the long-term learning.
Yeah, and it also sounds like, especially for parents that have younger kids, that there's certainly a value in having size appropriate furniture, because obviously for let's say the kitchen table, a lot of kids can't reach the ground, or
Right.
like a couch, depending on the size of the couch and size of the child.
Yeah, exactly. And that's actually a very big issue for schools, really all over the world. There's actually was a very successful project in the UK where the school system wanted, very large school system, wanted to replace school chairs with stacking chair, which had the seat sloping backwards, which of course would make it hard to be upright. So a group of Alexander teachers actually lobbied very successful for chairs that promoted more upright sitting. There's actually a preschool and sort of like ages 3 to 6, a little bit into kindergarten here, where they don't have chairs. Kids are not required to sit in chairs. They can do their schoolwork, they can do their projects, they can do story time in whatever position, as long as they're sitting quietly. This idea of asking a child to sit still, or even us grown-ups to sit still, it's really hard because we're not designed to be still. But if we could sit quietly, kids know quiet. It's possible to wiggle quietly. And if we're
Right.
sitting,
So it seems like being in a position that you're comfortable in would allow you to actually maybe not wiggle as much, or do in a way where it's not disturbing to others.
right. And then we're not disturbing others and we're not wiggling as much, then there's more energy left over for concentrating and doing whatever the task at hand requires. Yeah. And including paying attention, right? I mean, the idea of being able to be quiet enough in ourselves in order to listen to what the teacher is saying, in order to participate in a group or a class circle. I mean, those are really important skills for young kids. And it's a little bit more challenging for kids who are struggling with ADHD or emotional frustrations.
Right, exactly. Like one of the things I like to think about is I call it the idea of harnessing fidgeting to improve focus. That by sort of harnessing the fidgeting in a controlled way, so you're not necessarily stopping it, but doing it in a way that maybe works a little bit better and isn't as disruptive, in turn can focus better and then be more engaged.
Right. And that's what I love, that word harnessing, because kids understand harnessing their energy. And then they feel like, when kids feel like they have control over their energy, to the little ones, we say, we're teaching you how to be the boss of your body. To a teenager, we might say, we're teaching you how to harness your energy, how to navigate or negotiate with your energy. Because then if they feel like the locus of control is within themselves, then it's a lot easier to help them participate and go along with whatever it is you're asking them to do. Yeah.
Right, exactly. Because you're sort of taking a collaborative approach as opposed to sort of saying they have to do it this way.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that's where you get into issues with schools, where schools obviously have to cater to a lot of people. So it's hard for them to individualize it. But again, it's, if it's not working for a fair amount of people, if it's, cheaper for the school or for other reasons, this is how it's been done for many years. It's hard sometimes some schools I think are definitely far better than others with kind of making those changes to be accommodating. But I do think that it is definitely a big issue if you think about the structure of the typical school, especially for younger kids. I mean, even for high school, it's still not great, but at least middle school and high school, for the most part, kids are every 45 minutes, an hour, depending on the length of class, at least getting up. Whereas sort of elementary school age kids, while there's, certainly shifting around and ideally interactive stuff, it's often still a long time to sit.
It is, and that's something that those of us in the healthcare and educational fields are trying to address. And so teachers actually, if they have been given, if they learn the same skills that the kids are learning, then the teachers can get kids to cooperate in that manner also. I mean, can you imagine just the beginning of first grade or the beginning of a class when you're in middle school and everybody's running around and it's a really nice spring day, winter's over and nobody wants to sit. And if the teacher just said, okay, everybody, before you sit down, let's all just stop. And can you look around and see? And can you breathe? And can you be soft and tall? And then everybody can sit down, and then the teachers got their attention, right? They're using their bodies, so they're harnessing all that physical energy, and then now they're ready to learn and focus.
Right. So these, in some ways, fairly simple strategies that teachers can use, and obviously other people as well, that in turn can make a huge difference in terms of overall functioning of the class, how relaxed and engaged people are, and for other reasons, certainly, make things probably a lot better.
Yeah, and that relaxation is part of that safety aspect, right? If a teacher in the classroom, if a parent at home is creating a space of collaboration, is creating a space of support and safety, that's also going to make it easier for kids to quiet themselves and then to focus and concentrate. Yeah.
Right. No, exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, I think there's definitely a lot of different pieces to this, but it's also about the idea of, one size does not fit all. So the idea of looking at each person's individual needs and figuring out, what system or strategies or approach or approaches, would work the best to help that individual person.
Yeah. And I think one of the things that I really like about using the Ready List and some of the other principles we've been discussing is that each person has it for themselves. And so what stresses you out might be different than what stresses me out. But regardless, there are these foundational principles of how human beings function that each of us with our own individual preferences can rely on in order to help ourselves. I mean, when we're working with kind of universal principles of learning and how the human organism is designed to learn, then each person can use them to their own benefit. And that's different than the external structures that are set up in our educational system, which don't work for everyone, right?
Right. I mean, that's why, some people really thrive in school, in let's say a typical school, and others, need a different kind of environment, but are fully capable of thriving if it's, in sort of a different kind of environment.
Right. Right. I mean, some kids were able to thrive when everybody went on lockdown and shut down because they liked being out of the classroom, right? They felt a little bit more able to focus. And then the kids that were missing all the social energy, which helped them be able to focus, they were struggling also. So, being able to teach kids a skill set so they have something for themselves, I think is a real gift. And if we teach children how to learn, we want to learn how to learn. There's a way to learn. And if we can use our own body as an anchor and as a source, I think kids are just going to feel a lot more comfortable and safe.
Yeah, no, I think it's definitely a really good lesson, and point to share. Because it's funny, I was thinking about the lockdown and school on Zoom earlier on in our conversation as well. Because I feel like what kept coming back to, from my experiences, working with kids during that time, was that, there were some kids that really thrived in that situation more so than the regular classroom because, they had the ability sometimes to get up more and, have more control over their space, and they could fidget and no one was going to be disturbed by it usually. But then there are other kids that, really struggled because they had to sit for longer in different ways, or didn't, depending on how this class was set up, couldn't get up as much, or, certainly miss the social aspect.
Right.
Or, if they had a hard time focusing and there wasn't anyone to keep an eye on them at home, or sort of could be far more off task.
Yeah. And, for adults, it's a little bit easier to say to an adult, we know you're there in this meeting, even though your video is off, because then that adult, I mean, I have some of the adults in my practice and I teach this in my workshops. It's okay to move around. You know, if you're going to be on a conference call, walk around your home, walk around the office. But with kids, you can't necessarily do that, right? So you had kids on video, you had kids off video, older kids, some were synchronous, some were asynchronous. And so how do you give kids permission to move and learn at the same time? And sometimes moving is sitting quietly. I mean, that might sound like a paradox, but sitting is a really complicated activity. I mean, I don't know about you, but my feet have kind of lost the ground right now. So I don't know. Are your feet still on the floor?
No, I picked them up to put them back on the chair.
Yeah.
But they're actually normally on the ground. It's this particular chair, the way it's set up is my feet sort of are, I guess, hanging in front or something. But normally, most other chairs I use, they would be on the ground. But But I think it gets the idea, like even think about like a wobble chair, you know, and that's something that I think works well for a lot of kids. And, you know, so I've seen some schools, you know, let kids have those during class. For those of you who aren't aware of it, it's basically a chair where you sit on it and you almost have to move a little bit to keep it still.
Right. And those are great.
I personally enjoy it. I have one I sit on throughout sometimes during the day as well.
Yeah. And many years ago, we would use those big physio balls to sit on, and you could actually buy like this frame where a physio ball would sit on this small frame where it had 4 or 5 caster wheels.
Oh, it's like the yoga, like the chair right there.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Oh, so you've got one. Yeah, that's great. Yeah. So you see, so what's interesting is there's all these things out in the world and to help us sit more comfortably, right? And that's because sitting is a really complicated task. Right. So
I think there are also times where, I think this is probably easier for adults in a working environment than for kids in school. But I've seen this in school sometimes too, where you don't necessarily always have to sit. Even you can stand sometimes while you're working or learning. You know, and some schools are set up better for kids who want to do that. But standing desk, or a balance board, something that allows people to kind of get movement in, but not even have to sit the whole time.
Yeah, and I think those kids who feel more comfortable moving, if we give them permission to move or to stand in the back of the classroom or maybe sprawl on their bellies on the floor, they're probably going to be able to pay attention more than if you're asking them to sit behind a desk in a chair at a table. Right? I mean, again, we're giving them control over their bodies. And when we feel like we're in control, we're more easily able to pay attention.
Yeah. Well, here's a question, or maybe sort of a final question that I was thinking from this is, so one of the questions that I get asked a lot is, a parent will say, my kid likes to do homework sprawled out on their bed. And usually the parent takes issue with it. Like, how do you feel about a child sprawled out on their bed doing their homework?
So I'm of two minds, actually. I think it's really important from a very early age to learn good sleep hygiene. Reading for a few minutes in bed before we fall asleep is fine, but beds are for sleeping, and sleep is such an issue. For young kids, it's a little bit hard or easier to fall asleep. Teenagers, as we know, are just horribly sleep deprived. And so we need to get into good habits around sleep when we're younger. And the other part of me is that if you're most comfortable sprawled in bed reading and studying, if there's really no other options, then we go with that. But I might ask that parent, and I might investigate with that child, what's making it difficult to be in the chair, to be at a desk, or to be on the floor? Like, what's interfering in that way, and how can we transition them out of the bed into another piece of furniture or another workstation setup so that they can learn good sleep hygiene and at the same time be comfortable enough to concentrate to do their homework.
Yeah, well, that's a really good question. The question is definitely important, because you always want to understand if something's not working or not doing a certain way, why? Because that often holds the key to make things better.
Yep. And, developmental, this is a completely different conversation, but learning, thinking, feeling, movement, all of these functions on the part of the human being are developed from a very early age, and they're all linked together. So we want to figure out, well, is there something going on with how kids are growing and learning that's getting in the way of them being able to do these tasks. But again, I think it just comes down to, every child has their own particular learning style. And I think our job as educators is to tap into and to learn and understand what that child needs so we can create the conditions for them to thrive. I mean, that's our job, right? Is to figure out what's best for a kid and then create that situation so that they can learn best.
No, exactly. Yeah. Well, this has been a really great conversation. I've definitely had a lot of fun, learned a lot. Hope everyone listening has as well. And I guess, Gabrielle, if people want to reach out to you, where can they find you?
So they can find me at GabrielleCzaja.com. That's a mouthful. Gabrielle, GabrielleCzaja.com. My phone number, for those of you who still like landlines, is 202-223-4943. And I love to help people and I'd love to chat. So I hope those of you that are listening will feel free to reach out. Give me a call.
All right, wonderful. Well, thanks again for coming on the show today. It's been a lot of fun.
Carey, this has just been really lovely. Thank you so much for having me.
You're very welcome.